Welcome to this presentation about urban sound and power. Sound as lifeline, music, space, and power in Johannesburg, South Africa. This discussion, based on iconography, audiovisual materials, modern analytical discussions, and descriptions, explores the function of music in Johannesburg as a vital lifeline that mediates the relationship between space and power through genres rooted in township life and evolving into global forms. I argue that the best way to understand music from Johannesburg, South Africa is to look at the historical political systems and struggles of the natives. Sonic practices both expose deep-rooted urban inequalities and enable marginalized communities to reconfigure spatial belonging, sustain livelihood, and assert cultural agency in the post-apartheid city. So I'm going to give you a brief background. Johannesburg was formed in 1886 following the discovery of gold in the Witwatersrand, rapidly transforming from a mining camp into a boom town that drew migrants from Southern Africa, Europe, and Asia, laying the foundation for South Africa's modern economy amid deep racial and class divisions. Before this, the region was inhabited by San hunter-gatherers and Bantu-speaking Anglo-pastoral communities. Between 1887 and 1889, the city developed municipal governance, transport, and financial institutions, introducing early racialized labor controls. The South African War of 1899 to 1902 disrupted mining but ultimately integrated Johannesburg into British imperial networks. From 1904 to 1920, enforced removals and spatial segregation institutionalized racial zoning, while manufacturing expanded the labor unrest, including the 1922 Rand Rebellion, highlighted social tensions. Between the 1930s and 1960s, rapid population growth, passed laws, and apartheid legislation, including the 1950 Group Areas Act, reinforced segregation and reshaped the urban landscape, with events like the destruction of Sophia Town and the creation of Soweto. Political repression intensified after the 1960 Sharperville massacre, but culturally producing and resistance persisted, culminating into the 1967 Soweto uprising. The late apartheid period saw civic unrest, labor strikes, and expanding informal settlements. Following the apartheid's end in 1944, Johannesburg underwent demographic, political, and cultural transformation, with the post-1990s migration, inner city decline, and urban regeneration shaping the modern city. Infrastructure upgrades, notably for the 2010 FIFA World Cup, integrated Johannesburg into global networks, yet persistent inequality, land disputes, and debates over memory and decolonization continue to influence its evolution. Geography, climate, and economy. Johannesburg is in the northeastern South Africa, within the province of Gauteng, at approximately 26 degrees 12 south, 2802 degrees east. The city lies on the Witwatersrand Plateau, a prominent east-west escarpment that forms part of the Highveld region. Elevations range from 1600 to 1800 meters above sea level, making Johannesburg one of the highest major cities globally. The underlying geology is dominated by Archean and Proterozoic formations, particularly the gold-bearing conglomerates of the Witwatersrand subgroup. Rivers originating in the region feed into both the Indian Ocean via the Limpopo system and the Atlantic Ocean via the Vaal Orange system. Johannesburg experiences a subtropic highland climate moderated by altitude rather than latitude. It has a mean annual temperature of 16 to 17 degrees Celsius. October and March is warm to hot, with average dynamic temperatures between 25 to 30 degrees Celsius. May to August is cool and dry, with daytime temperatures around 15 to 20 degrees Celsius and frequent nighttime frost. Trade and commerce. Johannesburg's trade and commerce developed rapidly after the 1886 discovery of gold on the Witwatersrand, transforming the city into an inland extractive metropolis structured around mining, capital, and global financial networks. Early principal occupations centered on gold mining, engineering, finance, transport, and mercantile services, supported by institutions such as Johannesburg Stock Exchange around 1887 and extensive railway links that connected the city to imperial markets. From its inception, commercial life was deeply racialized, where white population dominated ownership, skilled labor, and finance. Migration. Since its founding in 1886, Johannesburg has been shaped by waves of migration that deeply influenced its culture. African migrant laborers around 1886 to the present from rural South Africa and neighboring countries like Lesotho, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe brought languages, music, and dance that gave rise to urban genres. European settlers around 1800 and 1900, particularly British and Afrikaners, established financial, legal, and civic institutions, while Eastern European Jewish migrants around 1890s and 1930s contributed to commerce, the arts, and anti-apartheid activism. Indian migrants in the late 19th to early 20th century arrived as traders and professionals, bringing religion, food, and civic organization, including the early work of Gandhi. Smaller groups such as Chinese and post 1994 African immigrants from Nigeria, DRC Congo, Ethiopia, and Somalia added new business networks, music, and religious practices. Together, these diverse groups created a hybrid, dynamic city culture marked by layered languages, music, food, and social practices. Culture and pre-colonial musical traditions. I'm going to talk about specific watershed events. Apartheid. Apartheid was a legalized system of racial segregation and white supremacy enforced by the South African government from 1948 to the early 1990s. This system stripped black South Africans of citizenship, mandated separated public facilities, and restricted movement. It enforced rigid racial classifications and territorial separation, displacing millions of black South Africans into townships and homelands. Apartheid was codified through legislation such as Population Registration Act and the Group Areas Act, as noted by Tiriakian in 1960. Its policies restructured urban environments, particularly in centers like Johannesburg, and profoundly shaped the conditions under which music was created, circulated, and heard. Music under apartheid cannot be understood apart from its broader system of control. In cities like Johannesburg, these policies dismantled multicultural neighborhoods and reorganized everyday life, directly affecting where and how music could be performed. The destruction of places like Sophia Town, which was once a vibrant center of jazz and cultural exchange, symbolized how apartheid fractured existing musical communities while enforcing new ones to emerge under constrained conditions. Despite these restrictions, apartheid era conditions also fostered new musical forms and practices. In townships, Musicians developed genres such as mbakanga and township jazz, shaped by migration, economic hardship, and dense social environments. Constraints emerged. Constraints encouraged innovation as artists blended indigenous traditions with global influences like jazz and popular music, producing hybrid styles that reflected both local realities and broader cultural connections. Music also became a powerful tool of political resistance during apartheid. Protest songs and freedom songs played a central role in mobilizing communities, expressing collective struggles, and sustaining morale during demonstrations and acts of resistance. Artists such as Miriam Makeba and Hugh Masekela were forced into exile but used their platforms to draw global attention to apartheid. Within the country, music was integral to resistance movements like Black Consciousness Movement and Soweto Uprising, as noted by Livermore in 2018. Apartheid finally came to an end in 1994 with Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress triumphing in the country's first democratic elections. So I'm going to talk about cultural influences. Johannesburg's vernacular culture is a product of layered culture encounters across food, agriculture, religion, language, and music. Foodways blend African staples like maize and morogo and Indian curries, European pastries, and West African street foods. Peri-urban agriculture supports maize, vegetables, and legumes cultivated by African immigrant farmers and informal gardeners. Religion is diverse and syncretic, combining African traditional beliefs with Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and new Pentecostal movements introduced by recent migrants. Language reflects this diversity with isiZulu, Sesotho, Setswana, and Sisonga interacting with English, Afrikaans, and Indian languages, producing distinctive urban accents and vocabulary. Music embodies these encounters, evolving from marabi and jazz to mbakanga, kwaito, and amapiano alongside Afrobeat. Congolese rumba and Indian devotional forms, creating a dynamic hybrid urban soundscape. Musical traces and influences. I'm going to talk about sunrock paintings of a trance or healing dance. This picture is a sunrock painting of a trance or healing dance. I use it to trace pre-colonial music making and traditions. Prior to the 1800 CE, the paintings were done on rocks by the San people, which is an ancient ethnic group, who were widely regarded as the earliest inhabitants of South Africa. The ethnic group consisting of two or collectively referred to as the Khoisan, comprising of the Khoi and San. Traditionally, the San lived as hunter-gatherers, and maintained a close relationship with the environment, learning how to read nature's signs to survive. They relied on gathering wild fruits and plants and hunting wild game, which led to nomadic lifestyle. The kind of lifestyle depicted in many of the rock paintings found in different parts of South Africa. The image depicts a group of individuals engaged in what appears to be a dance, many of whom are holding sticks while wearing leg rattles. These rattles likely produced sound as the dancers moved their bodies, suggesting as an integrated relationship between movement and sonic production. From left to right, their bodies appear in varied postures, which may indicate that the patterns seem to emphasize, or which may indicate that dancers were not following a rigid or highly formalized choreography. Instead, the movement patterns seem to emphasize collective participation and embodied expression rather than display of individual virtuosity or strictly composed sequences. As argued by Lewis in 2006, healing dances in many African contexts, often including elements that can be seen only by ritual specialists in trance. This, this perspective suggests that aspects of performance may represent spirituality or cosmological experiences that are not immediately visible to ordinary observers. The South African Cafe Choir Tour 1891 to 1893. This image was taken by the London Stereoscopic Company on the South African Cafe Choir Europe and American Tour around 1891 to 1893. In the late 19th century, missionary education and colonial institutions significantly reshaped musical culture across South Africa. Choirs trained in Christian hymnody began performing both locally and internationally, often emerging from mission schools where musical instruction formed part of a broader program of religious and cultural education. These ensembles were strongly influenced by Victorian choral traditions and Western harmonic practices, which were introduced through missionary pedagogy. So this image portrays 15 individuals dressed in a variety of attire. 13 of them appear to be of African descent, while 2 appear to be of Western descent. Based on their hairstyles and clothing, the contrasting garments and regalia serve as visual markers of material culture associated with South Africa, suggesting the coexistence of different cultural identities within the same visual frame. The photograph includes men, women, and children, which suggests community-based context rather than an isolated ensemble. The presence of children is particularly significant as it may indicate the intergenerational transmission of music and cultural knowledge, a common feature in many African musical traditions where learning occurs through participation, observation, and communal engagements. So I'm going to talk about repertoires. Jazz in Sophiatown. Sophiatown was a suburb in Johannesburg, South Africa during the apartheid era. It was a poor multiracial area and a black cultural hub which produced some of South Africa's most famous writers, musicians, politicians, and artists like Father Huddleston, Kan Themba, Block Modisan, Eskia Fafalele, Arthur Meimane, Todd Mashikiza, Nat Nakasa, Kasem Motsisi, Dagmar Boite, and Louis Nkotsi, before it was destroyed in 1955 under apartheid. The town was then rebuilt as a whites-only area under the name of Triumph in the 1960s. It, however, officially returned to its original name in 2006. Sophiatown was one of the oldest black areas in Johannesburg, and this destruction represented the human rights violation in South Africa under apartheid. The photograph captures a small live music ensemble performing in a crowded indoor venue. It features saxophone and trombone players who look to be of African descent. Having Western music instruments is an indication of Western music influence. The picture's arrangement suggests a high intimate performance setting, typically of township jazz clubs, shebeens, which were the informal drinking venues, and community gatherings. So I'm going to talk about Johannesburg music repertoires. Music in Johannesburg has been through different times and influences given its cultural diversity. From the outset, music in Johannesburg functioned as a social glue, political commentary, spiritual practice, and urban entertainment. It merged in compounds, shebins, churches, mission schools, and township street spaces where rural musical idioms encountered industrial modernity, as noted by Rorich in 1989. Pre-urban stroke pre-industrial. During the 18th century, music in South Africa was regionally organized around kingship structures, pastoral economies, and ritual authority structures. Music functioned as embedded social practice integrated with governance, initiation, healing, warfare, court ceremony, and everyday labor. Present day Johannesburg fell within Sotoswana and Xhosa culture zones during the 1700s. These and surrounding communities played bow instruments such as dinika, lethlakar, reed pipe ensembles, or which was used for ceremonial music and signaling. Lekolilo, a flute made of red and purple leaf blown at the end. Falafala or lepapata, horn made from sabo. Antelope, often used in dances and rituals. Performers manipulated overtone series through mouth resonance, producing complex harmonic interplay between voice and the instrument. Praise, pottery, and court songs were performed by Imbogi, that is, praise poets. Their elaborate forms carried political authority and historical memory. They also had trance healing music and dances which were structured with altered states of consciousness, also used for communal restoration. They were performed with cyclical singing, clapping, and stamping created polyrhythmic textures as depicted in the picture. Just like music across sub-Saharan Africa, this music was characterized with structure features with call and response, vocal organization, cyclical repetition rather than linear development, integration of music and dance, collective participation over audience performer separation, flexible pitch systems, and close integration of music with cosmology and governance. Iskatamia. Iskatamia is a South African Zulu a cappella choral tradition that emerged in the early 20th century within racial capitalism, migrant labor, and rapid urbanization circumstances. It is believed to have emerged in the 20th century, specifically in the 1920s and 1930s, as a form of urban adaptation. The music is also believed to have roots in American minstrels and ragtime US vaudeville troops that toured South Africa extensively in 1860, as noted by Earlman in his 1990 publication. It is an amalgamation of minstrel-inspired songs and Zulu traditional music, amidst having rural nguni vocal aesthetics. It developed its distinctive style in urban industrial centers such as Johannesburg and Durban. The genre represents a sonic negotiation of displacement where rural Zulu men separated from their families and working in mines and factories came up with a defined harmonically intricate performance that articulated both longing and dignity within the oppressive urban conditions, also noted by Alman in his 1990 publication. The term iskatamia comes from a Zulu word katama, which meaning to walk softly or to tread lightly. This description applies to both the stylized footwork of performers and the social need for quiet mobility within male hostels under strict colonial surveillance and later apartheid regulation. Central to iskatamia practice are all-night competitions typically held on weekends. Choirs often named after animals, political aspirations, or rural homesteads gathered to perform before judges and revival groups. Earlier examples of Iskatamia is Mbube by Solomon Linda, recorded in Johannesburg in 1939. This song layered vocal structure and driving bassline popularized the Mbube style nationally and internationally, later adapted as The Lion King Sleeps Tonight. Another example is the album Graceland by Lady Smith Black Mambazo in collaboration with Paul Simon in 1986, which brought Iskatamia to global audiences. Main Tejas in 1990 argues that this collaboration was embedded in many levels of music and music making process and different interpretations depending on the listener's positionality. Kwaito is a music genre that emerged in South Africa, specifically Soweto and Johannesburg between the late 1890s and 1990s. Occurring at a slower tempo range than other styles of house music, it features use of South African sounds and samples. It has catchy melodic and percussive loop samples, deep bass lines, and vocals. The word kwaito originates from South African slang kwai, which conveys the meaning of cool or bad in a positive context. It is most strongly associated with Johannesburg and particularly the township of Soweto. Given its time period, kwaito became the defining sound of the first post-apartheid generation. Unlike struggle songs of the 1880s, kwaito often foregrounds themes of leisure, dance, fashion, cars, and township pride. Independent record labels in Johannesburg such as Kalawa Jasmi and Ghetto Rough were central to kwaito's commercial development. The genre circulated through taxis, shebins, clubs, and national radio, thereby embedding itself in everyday urban life. Artists such as Arthur Mafokate, Mandoza, Boomshaka, and Zola shaped kwaito's sound and public image. Mafokate's early 1990s hit Kafir controversially reclaimed a racial slur, signaling a generational refusal to conform to apartheid-era respectability politics. Swat in 2008 discusses the relationship between kwaito and hip-hop music, asking whether kwaito should be understood as South African hip-hop or its own distinct culture form. She suggests that how we answer this question shapes our understanding of South African culture, identity, and youth politics. So now I'm going to talk about the actors in South African and Johannesburg music. I now explore the lives of the legacies of two selected pivotal figures in South Africa's musical and cultural history, T. Soga and Hugh Masekela. Although separated by more than a century, both individuals played transformative roles in shaping how music functions as a medium of identity, resistance, and cultural expression within South African society. T. Soga was born in 1829 and died in 1871. T. Soga was a pioneering Xhosa intellectual, journalist, translator, and the first ordained black South African minister in the Presbyterian Church. He occupies a pivotal position in the intellectual, religious, and cultural history of 19th century South Africa, particularly as a figure mediating between colonial modernity and indigenous epistemologies. Born in a Xhosa community in the Eastern Cape during a period marked by frontier conflict and expanding British imperial influence, Soga's early formation at Mission Institutions such as Lovedale positioned him within evangelical networks that sought to reshape African subjectivity through literacy, Christianity, and Western culture forms. His later theological training and ordination in Scotland, which culminated in his affiliation with the United Presbyterian Church of Scotland, situated him within transnational circuits of religious and intellectual exchange. His return to the Cape Colony thus represents a complex re-entry into a contested social-cultural landscape where questions of race, authority, and cultural legitimacy were continuously negotiated. Soga's contribution to South African musical history are best understood through his role in processes of translation, mediation, and adaptation. His composition, Lizali's Indiga Lako, stands among the earliest extant examples of coastal language Christianity hymnody, marking a critical moment in the indigenization of European liturgical music. Rather than simply reproducing Western hymn forms, Soga's work can be read as a form of sonic translation in which harmonic and melodic conventions were rearticulated within phonological, rhythmic, and expressive parameters of isiXhosa. This not only enabled broader congregational participation but also challenged the presumed universality of European sacred music by embedding it within local linguistic and affective frameworks. In doing so, Soga helped establish a precedent for vernacular sacred music that would become central to African Christian practice and identity formation. Equally significant is Soga's influence to the institutionalization of choral traditions within mission education systems, particularly in the Eastern Cape, which would shape subsequent generations of African composers. Figures like John Knox Bokwe and Enoch Sontoga extended and transformed this legacy, contributing to the emergence of Amakwaya, a hybrid choral tradition blending European harmonic structures with African vocal aesthetics. Within these lines, Soga's insistence on the use of isiXhosa in both literary and musical production assumes political as well as cultural significance, enabling the articulation of African identity within colonial constraints. Hugh Masekela, born in 1939, died in 2018. Hugh Masekela stands as one of the most internationally recognized figures in South African music, whose career bridged jazz innovation, political resistance, and global popular culture. Born in Kwaguga Township in Witbank, now Emalahleni, Masekela's early musical development was shaped by the vibrant but segregated urban cultures of apartheid South Africa. He was introduced to the trumpet as a teenager through the encouragement of anti-apartheid priest Trevor Huddleston, and soon became associated with Huddleston Jazz Band, one of the country's first youth jazz ensembles. His early experiences in musical theater, most notably landmark production King Kong in 1959, placed him with a generation of black South African artists who were gaining prominence despite increasing political repression. Following the Sharperville massacre, Masekela went into exile, a move that would profoundly shape both his music trajectory and political consciousness. During his 3 decades in exile, Masekela developed a transnational career that connected South African musical idioms with global jazz and popular music circuits. After studying at the Manhattan School of Music, he became part of a diaspora of exiled South African musicians in the United States and Europe, collaborating with major artists and engaging with civil rights movements. His 1968 hit Grazing in the Grass achieved international chart success, demonstrating his ability to move fluidly between instrumental jazz, pop, and African musical influences. At the same time, his music increasingly took on an explicitly political dimension, addressing the injustices of apartheid and the experience of exile. Songs such as Soweto Blues, performed by Miriam Makeba, and Bring Him Back Home became anthems of resistance, articulating both the pain of displacement and the demand for liberation. Masekela's influence on South Africa's musical history is both foundational and far reaching. Musically, he played a crucial role in the development and global dissemination of styles such as Mbakanga, Afro-jazz, and later Afro-pop, synthesizing indigenous rhythmic structures with jazz improvisation and popular forms. Institutionally and culturally, his career contributed to the formation of a global anti-apartheid soundscape in which music functions and as a vehicle for political advocacy, solidarity, and identity. Following his return to South Africa in the 1990s after the end of apartheid, Masekela continued to mentor younger musicians and support the revitalization of the country's music industry. His legacy thus lies not only in his virtuosic trumpet performance and compositional output, but also in his role as a cultural ambassador, activist, and architect of a musical language that articulated the struggles and aspirations of South Africa across generations. This study has demonstrated that music in Johannesburg is not only merely a cultural byproduct of urban life, but a central mechanism through which space and power are negotiated, contested, and reimagined. By drawing on iconography, audiovisual archives, and contemporary analytical discourse, the discussion has shown that a Johannesburg sonic landscape is inseparable from the city's history of racial segregation, labor exploitation, and political struggle. To understand its music is to engage with the lived realities of those who have navigated and resisted these structural conditions. Ultimately, this study argues that music must be understood as a lifeline, one that binds together past and present, local and global, oppression and agency. Johannesburg sonic practices reveal how marginalized communities do not merely endure structural inequality but actively reshape the urban environment through sound. In this way, music emerges as both as a critical lens for analyzing the city and transformative force within it, continually redefining the relationship between space, power, and cultural identity in the post-apartheid era. Thank you for listening to me. Have a great time.